Welcome to the Truth and Fertility podcast. I'm Haley Yeager. Today's episode is a little bit different than my typical interview episode. I'm going to be sharing my talk from the SEEK26 conference. So if you're unfamiliar with what SEEK is, it is a conference put on every year by Focus, which is Fellowship of Catholic University Students. It is an amazing conference that is for college students that are interested in the Catholic faith, on fire for the Catholic faith. It's phenomenal. They do an amazing job every year, and I was very blessed to be able to go to promote the Truth and Fertility Project and to give this talk. So my talk was called The Untold Truth About Your Health and Hormones. I went over female reproductive system, birth control, restorative reproductive medicine, the whole thing. So the audio came out, which I'm very excited to share with you. There is no video to it. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see my face now. But once I play the audio of my talk, I'll probably just put the thumbnail with my face on it. So I hope you enjoy the talk. If you listen to this talk at the actual SEEK conference, I hope you enjoy it again. And if this is the first time for you, I think you're going to learn something, and I'm very excited. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my SEEK26 talk titled The Untold Truth About Your Health and Hormones.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jess Fagoni, and I am an 8th year. Yeah, I know some of y'all in this room. What's up, ladies? I have the privilege and the honor of introducing our speaker, Haley Yeager, who is one of my best friends. I was the maid of honor at her wedding. We went to Arizona State University together, and we were reminiscing that, come on, y'all, come on. 9 or 10 years ago, we were both together at our first SEEK, and she has not been back to SEEK since, but here we are, full circle. You guys, this woman is so incredible, and I am so stoked at just the truths that she's going to share with you today. She has greatly impacted my life and my own health and healing journey. I just pray that the Lord opens your hearts to receive whatever it is that you need today, to be educated, especially for you women, on what is happening in your bodies and the gift of your bodies and the right next step that the Lord might be inviting you into. And for all you men in the room, praise God that you're here. You are a gift to all the women in your life and all the women to come. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Haley Yeager.
Hi, everyone. What a privilege it is for it to just come full circle like this, where 10 years ago, I was sitting where you were sitting. And now I have my best friend in the whole entire world introducing me up here. And I need to tell you as well that this whole day, I've been praying to the Lord, even if just 2 people show up to this talk, it'll be a blessing. And look at the amount of people in here that are hungry for this information. It's really a consolation from the Lord that this message is so important. So I'm very grateful that all of you are here today. This talk is called The Untold Truth About Your Health and Hormones. So let's just get into a little bit about me. First of all, again, my name is Haley Yeager. I, first and foremost, am a wife and a mother to 3 beautiful children. If any of you have heard crying during Mass in the last few days, they're probably my children, but I am so grateful for them, and they are running amok around here somewhere. I also have been a natural family planning instructor for about the last 8 years now, and that has given me just an incredible lens into the importance of this information about our health, about our hormones, about our body, how hungry people are for this information. And I know that a lot of times when I'm teaching, the first question that I get is, why have I never learned this before? Why have I never learned this before? And to be quite honest with you, I don't know. I don't know why. What I'm about to share with you genuinely is basic information, you guys. But it's not something we hear very often. So I'm very blessed and privileged to be here with you guys today. I do have experience working in an OBGYN clinic as their on-site NFP or natural family planning instructor, specifically in the Creighton method. Raise your hand if you are familiar with what that means, like the Creighton method. Okay, all right, a good amount of you in here, awesome. And then most recently, in the last few months, I felt the Lord calling me to teach virtually, and specifically to young adult single women about how to chart their cycle, specifically for the purpose of health management, and just giving them another option that their doctor might not be giving them. So I just can't say it enough how blessed I am to be here today. Now, in the spirit, actually, before I get there, I also want to say how surprised I am with how many men are in this room and how grateful I am. Ladies, let's give it up for the men really quick. Because I have to be honest with you, a lot of the information I'm giving you today is going to be about the women's body, about the female menstrual cycle. We're going to be talking about all of it. But I will tell you right now, men, the Lord is most likely either going to call you to marriage or call you to the priesthood. And if you're married, that means that you're going to be married to a woman who is experiencing these things. So it's really, really good to know this information. And I will also tell you that if you are called to the priesthood, or maybe you are a priest in this room right now, you will be walking with couples. You will be hearing in the confessional information about the struggles that couples and women are facing with their health, and maybe with infertility as well. So it's very important, no matter what vocation, men, that you are in or will be in, that you're here. So I'm grateful for that too. Now, in the spirit of Dr. Bruninger's talk yesterday about storytelling, I wanted to start my talk with a story as well. And this story starts when I was 16 years old. And here we go kind of with the TMI, guys. We're getting into it right now. When I was 16 years old, I was having irregular cycles. I never knew when my period was going to come. And at this point, most of my friends were pretty regular. They knew, and I never did. And so by the time I was 16, I thought, well, maybe this isn't right. Maybe there's something weird about this. So I went to my doctor and I said, I have irregular periods. What can you do for me? And what happens when a 16-year-old girl goes to the doctor's office and says, I have irregular periods? I see a hand raised. Yes. Birth control. I was put on the pill at 16 years old to quote unquote regulate my cycle. And I will tell you right now that by the absolute grace of God, it made me so moody. And after just 2 months, I was over it, my mom was over it. And so I decided this isn't worth it. I'm just gonna deal with the unpredictability and just move on. Well, at 18 years old, so about 2 years later, I was heavily involved in my parish youth group at the time. I was a senior in high school. And there was a talk given by this woman, one of our core leaders, about natural family planning. And something that she said in her talk just made this light bulb go off. She said that not only can fertility charting help you plan your families in discernment with the Lord, to be generous and prudent with your families, but it can also help with health management. It can help you understand if you're having any hormonal imbalances or anything that's off. You can see it on a fertility chart. And I thought to myself, here's the answer I was looking for. So I remember picking her brain like crazy after that talk. And what I forgot to mention to you guys too is I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. And there we go. And I am very blessed to have an amazing OBGYN clinic out there. It's called Morning Star OBGYN, where they practice something called Restorative Reproductive Medicine. And it's a long, fancy term for just saying that they're not going to put you on birth control. They're going to start you by teaching you how to learn how to chart your cycle. They're going to look at that chart as data, and they're going to help you get to the bottom of why you're experiencing whatever you're experiencing. Now, after this talk that I heard at my youth group, I went back to my mom and I said, I just learned this incredible thing. I want to go to this OBGYN clinic now. I want to see what this is all about. And my mom, being prudent, she said, well, let's just go back to your original doctor first and just see what else she can offer you. So I went back to that doctor first and I said, okay, I'm still having these irregular cycles, but this time I don't want the pill. What else can you offer me? And she said very kindly, she said, well, why don't you want the pill if you don't mind me asking? And at this moment, this is all that I knew. I said, well, if I'm not having a regular period, that probably means I'm not ovulating regularly. And the pill isn't going to help me do that. So what else can you offer me? And you guys, this is a medical doctor. She is smart. And I need to preface it by saying, she's not dumb. But she looked at me square in the face and she said, well, why do you want to ovulate? And it was at that moment that I realized we are speaking two different languages. Because in her eyes, she was seeing an 18-year-old woman, young adult woman, not married, not planning on having babies anytime soon, just wanting a regular cycle. But in my eyes, I'm starting to see that ovulation, that a regular cycle, that your body working the way that God created the female body to work matters no matter what state in life you're in. And it was almost like she said, well, let's say I came in there with a broken left arm. It was almost like she said, well, you write with your right arm anyway, so why do you need your left arm? But we all know, and hopefully are learning here today, how important it is, again, no matter what state in life that you're in, it is important that your body is healthy. So this talk, I really separated into 3 different parts. And the first part is going to be all about female anatomy and hormones. And I'm telling you guys right now, it's going to be like the high school health class that you should have had that you probably didn't have. And genuinely, this is the basics. Now, I saw a lot of you with paper and pencils out, and that's amazing. Write as much as you want. But in the back there, I do have QR codes taped to the wall where this PowerPoint that I'm going to show you, you can pull it up on your phone later today if you want to go back and view anything that I'm teaching you today, just because of how technical this talk can be. So the first part's going to be female anatomy and hormones. Then we're going to go into the bad news about how the birth control pill actually works and information that we're not usually given when we're prescribed this medication. But then I am going to end it on a good note with what else can we do? What other option do we have? So without further ado, let's get into it. Female anatomy and hormones. So here is your female reproductive anatomy. Clearly this is on the inside of the woman's womb. We want to start with the ovaries. Each woman has 2 ovaries, 1 on each side. They usually take turns ovulating. So ovulation is when an egg is released from your ovary. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about more about that. But your ovaries usually take turns ovulating. And what's really cool too is that the ovaries are what contain all of the eggs that a woman will ever have in her life. What's even cooler is that when a baby girl is still within her mother's womb at 20 weeks gestation. This means about halfway through a pregnancy. She has all of the eggs that she will ever have in those tiny little baby ovaries of hers. And it's after that that they start depleting. So they will either atrophy and be absorbed back by the body, or when that baby girl is born and starts to hit puberty one day and starts to ovulate and cycle, those eggs will be ovulated. So we have 2 ovaries, 1 on each side. And then we have the fallopian tube connecting that to then the uterus, which we'll talk about here in a minute. The fallopian tube is where an egg is released into when you ovulate. Now, what's really important about the fallopian tube, I do have a pointer. I'm not sure how well that shows up there, but I'm going to do it anyway. When a man and woman come together and they conceive a child, that new life is actually conceived in the outer third of the fallopian tube. So the sperm do travel all the way through the fallopian tubes to meet that egg to create a brand new human life. And so that new human life will travel through the fallopian tube and then enter into the uterus. The uterus is about the size of your fist, and it's very stretchy. Why is it stretchy? Because this is where a baby is housed during pregnancy. So of course it has to be stretchy as the baby grows. Now, what's very important is the inner lining of the uterus, and that is what we call the endometrium, which is also just known as the uterine lining. Now, this uterine lining is a bunch of blood cells and tissue, and that is the bleeding that you see when you're on your period. So when you're on your period, that uterine lining will shed, and that, again, is the bleeding that you see. However, when a woman is pregnant, this uterine lining is where that new life will implant and continue to receive nutrients and grow throughout the first part of that pregnancy. So it's incredibly important that this uterine lining gets thicker and thicker and thicker throughout the menstrual cycle, which if a woman isn't pregnant, then she'll have her period, it all sloughs off, and then it starts to regenerate again. Now below the uterus, we have the cervix. The cervix is so important, you guys, so important. If you know anything about natural family planning, you've probably heard of a term called cervical mucus or cervical fluid or discharge, right? This is where that originates from, is from the cervix. We'll talk more about the importance of that here in a little bit. But then beneath that, of course, we have the vaginal canal. Okay. Now let's get into the hormone side of things. So what are hormones anyway? So hormones are chemical signals traveling from one part of the body to another to regulate different processes within the body, okay? So the two main hormones we're gonna talk about today are estrogen and progesterone. These are the two main female sex hormones that have their specific jobs throughout every single menstrual cycle. I'll get into here in a minute exactly what their jobs are, but let's start here by looking at ovulation, because we have to understand truly what this is before we can get into the mechanisms of those hormones. So ovulation is when an egg is released from the ovary, right? As I already mentioned. It occurs on only one day of every cycle. So it is impossible to ovulate today and then ovulate again next week. It's just not how our bodies are made. It's not how God created them. So we only ovulate one day of every cycle, and it is the main event of your cycle. Sometimes we think of the period being the main event just because it's the most obvious, but the period is actually reliant on ovulation happening. You will not have a true period unless ovulation is happening before that. So some women might have intermittent bleeding every once in a while, but we cannot call this a period unless ovulation happened prior. Okay, that is super important to recognize. Okay, I also have a chart here that kind of shows these ebbs and flows of estrogen and progesterone throughout the cycle. I know it can kind of look a little confusing here, but just to outline it for a second here, this top line is estrogen, that's pink in case you can't see that. And the orange line here is progesterone, the one that stays fairly low up until ovulation happens and then rises. Testosterone is also on there too. We're not talking about that today, but just know that it is still present in the female body as well. Now, we're looking here at the two phases of the female menstrual cycle. So the beginning of her cycle is the beginning of her period, the first day of bright red blood flow. This is the first day of her whole cycle. The last day of the cycle is the day before the next period. So if we're talking about somebody who has a very regular, typical cycle, we're talking about the 28-day golden standard, right? And then usually right in the middle of that is when ovulation is occurring. So if we're looking at the two phases of the cycle, the first phase is called the follicular phase. This is also known as the pre-ovulatory phase. This is where estrogen is dominant. Estrogen is playing its role hard in this phase of your cycle. And this phase is also extremely variable. This is going to be the one that for women who have long or irregular cycles, it's the pre-ovulation phase or this follicular phase that's going to be a lot more longer or variable. The luteal phase, however, which is also known as the post-ovulatory phase, is very stable. Usually after a woman ovulates, she has about 2 weeks until her next period. That's pretty much a given for any woman. And this can be really good news for women who have long and unpredictable cycles, because if she's paying attention to the signs her body gives her, she can understand around the time of ovulation. And if she understands around the time of ovulation, then she'll know, okay, in about 2 weeks, I'll have my next period. So there's no surprise there, and that can be really freeing. Also, in this phase of the cycle, progesterone is taking its turn. Progesterone is the main hormone in this phase. Estrogen is still there, but progesterone must be dominant. Okay, this is very, very important. All right, now let's get into exactly what these hormones are doing. So with estrogen, it comes from your ovary. Progesterone also comes from your ovary. Both of these hormones are coming from the ovary. And one of its most important jobs is that it talks to the cervix to tell the cervix to start producing this thing called cervical mucus, aka cervical fluid, aka discharge, or whatever you heard it called in the past. It is due to estrogen that you see this. So it's very common around the time of ovulation that a woman is going to be seeing more of this, because the higher her estrogen, the more clear, the more stretchy, the more slippery this stuff is going to get. So the cervix producing this fluid is a direct reflection of your hormones. So this is just one of the signs that your body can give you to help you understand where you're at in your cycle. And we'll talk here a little bit about that too. Now, cervical mucus is vital for a healthy fertility. If you've probably never heard of this phrase before, but you're about to hear it now, is that sperm love cervical mucus. They love it, okay? They can't survive without it. And that is actually what is pictured here. So like all of us who have seen cervical mucus under a microscope, we can see here on the left-hand side, it's more of a ferning pattern. This is what mucus looks like when estrogen is not very high. It's dry, it's not very slippery, it's not very stretchy, it's just kind of there, or maybe it's completely dried up in like a clump. However, when estrogen is high, we see it looking like this on the right side. You can kind of think of it like an Olympic swimming pool. It will literally form channels within the mucus that, guess what, allow sperm to swim through. So it literally opens the gates for sperm to swim through. It also contains tons of sugars that the sperm feed off of, which keeps them alive. So to give you an example of this, if a woman has intercourse at a time when she doesn't really have a whole lot of cervical mucus there, because of the acidic environment in the vaginal canal, the sperm can only live mere hours. But if a woman has intercourse when her estrogen is high, she's producing a lot of this cervical mucus, that sperm from one act of intercourse can live within her body for up to 5 days. This is how important cervical mucus is for our bodies, okay? Especially for the sake of our fertility down the road when we are married and we want to have children. Without cervical mucus, it is incredibly difficult for pregnancy to occur because sperm love cervical mucus. Now, however, let's take a step back for a second and remember why this even matters to you if you're not married, you're not planning a family right now, and you're just trying to be healthy. Well, because a healthy pattern of production of this cervical mucus signifies a healthy ebb and flow of your hormones. And a healthy ebb and flow of your hormones signifies a healthy body, which is very important. So no matter what your state in life is right now or your family planning intention is right now, it is incredibly important that these natural bodily processes are happening regularly and normally. Now, estrogen, as I already mentioned, is dominant in that pre-ovulation phase. It is still present in the post-ovulation phase. It's just not dominant at that time. And then the last, or one of the other main events or things that it does in our body is that it starts to thicken the uterine lining. So when a woman is on her period, it's that uterine lining that's being shed, okay? After she's finished with her period, estrogen takes its turn, it starts to rise. So that uterine lining starts to thicken again and regenerate. And this is happening cycle after cycle after cycle. Now let's talk about progesterone. I have to stop for a minute and tell you that this beautiful picture of this baby is actually my first niece. She was just born about a month ago, and my brother and his wife decided to pay a lot of money for professional pictures of her. So she is in my slide today, and she's beautiful, and I love her to death. But the reason I have her up here is because progesterone is called progesterone because it is a progestation hormone. Everything that this hormone does is for the sake of preparing the body for new life, okay? So I'll kind of outline that here. Again, it comes from your ovary, and it talks to the cervix to do the exact opposite as what estrogen was telling it to do. It tells the cervix to stop all production of cervical mucus. It's also dominant in the post-ovulation phase, and it does a few things for us in our post-ovulation phase. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that our body as women, every single cycle is going to pretend that you're pregnant until it realizes that it's not, which I know can kind of be a weird thing, especially if you're single. But it's true. That is progesterone's job, is to maintain the life of a newly conceived life within your womb until it realizes, oh, there's no life there. We don't need this hormone anymore. It can drop, and that's when you have your next period. But let's talk about the few things that it does. First of all, it inhibits any further ovulation from happening. That's why we, as women, only ovulate one day of the cycle. It also, as I mentioned, dries up cervical mucus because it is inhibiting any sperm or bacteria from entering the vaginal canal. Why? Well, first of all, if you're past ovulation, you're not going to be ovulating again, which means pregnancy for the rest of that specific cycle is impossible, because if there's no egg, there's no baby. So what's the point of sperm being there, right? Now, the other part here is that it's preventing bacteria from entering the uterus. Why? Because that is where a potential new life is. So we want to protect that. Your body, whether you knew it or not, is pro-life. It also increases body temperature. Progesterone is a thermogenic hormone. So if you've ever, who here has heard of people taking their temperature to understand their fertility? Who here has an Oura ring? Just a few of you? Okay, I know that's like a really new upcoming thing now of the Oura ring taking your temperature, which is very exciting. But it is because of this hormone progesterone that we can even do that to understand where our fertility is. As progesterone rises, your body temperature rises. And so it gives you a good sense of where you are at in your cycle, if you're post-ovulation or if you're still waiting for it to happen. Now, it also helps thicken the uterine lining. It kind of takes over estrogen's job in this sense, and it continues to thicken it throughout the rest of that cycle. And what's really interesting too about progesterone's job in thickening the uterine lining is that it also gives the uterine lining this nutrient-filled fluid. And why do you think a nutrient-filled fluid is within a woman's womb? For the sake of new life. Again, everything your body is doing post-ovulation is for the sake of new life. Now again, if your body recognizes after about 2 weeks post-ovulation that, okay, I'm not pregnant, I don't need any of these things that I've been working toward, so we can drop and the whole thing starts over again. So that is how our bodies are meant to work. It's how God created the female hormone ebbs and flows throughout her cycle. This middle part of my talk, I purposefully put it in the middle because I wanted it to be more or less like a compliment sandwich, where I give you the first part that's really good news and the last part is really good news, but the middle part is hard news. But this is the information that was kept from me when I was put on the birth control pill. And so I'm praying here that if you are on the birth control pill now, or any sort of hormonal contraceptive, or your girlfriend is on the pill, I don't want you to sit here thinking I'm judging you, thinking that I look down on you. I am so glad you're here because now you can make an informed decision about your health. Because you probably have never heard this before, if I'm guessing. So let's talk now about how the pill disrupts this process. I also want to say too that when I say the pill or birth control, I'm referring to any sort of hormonal birth control. So this goes for the pill, it goes for a hormonal IUD, it goes for the Depo-Provera shot, it goes for the Nexplanon implant, anything, any type of hormonal birth control that is changing your hormones. So how does birth control actually work? Let's talk about that first. So it's important to know that the pill is not a targeted medication. It is simultaneously affecting every single cell in your entire body. It does not recognize, oh, we're just going to affect the reproductive system. No, it affects every cell in your body. So most forms of birth control out there are a daily dose or a slow release of a synthetic version of estrogen and progesterone. The synthetic form of progesterone is called progestin. It's a synthetic version, so it is not chemically the same as the hormones that you are producing in your body now. Some pills only have progesterone or progestin, but some of them have a combination of both synthetic estrogen and progestin. It puts your body in a state that's roughly similar to the second half of your cycle. So after you've ovulated, your progesterone is high, roughly similar. Not exactly the same, but similar. And so if you've ever heard of the pill kind of tricking your body into thinking that it's pregnant, that's sort of what it's getting at. Again, it's not the same, but it's similar. And now remember too, that with a healthy cycling woman, she's only in this phase, mind you, with her natural hormones for about 2 weeks. But when a woman is on hormonal birth control, she can be on it for however long she decides to be on it. You could be like me, where you were only on it for a few months. You could be like a lot of other women I've talked to who were on it for decades. Your body is not meant to be in this state for decades, let alone 1 month. It's meant to be in this state of natural hormones for 2 weeks. Now let's talk about the effects of hormonal birth control. Let's talk about the main modes of action that they have. So the first mode of action, number 1, is that it suppresses ovulation, clearly. If there's no egg, there's no baby, hence the reason why it's called birth control. Now, the second mode of action here is that it dries up your cervical mucus. Why? Because as we already learned, sperm love cervical mucus. So if there's no cervical mucus there, it's very unlikely that sperm is going to be able to live within the woman's body long enough after an act of intercourse to reach an egg to conceive a baby. But we all know that no form of any birth control, for that matter, is 100% effective. So what happens when mode number 1 fails and a woman does ovulate? That means that there's an egg present. And what happens when mode number 2 fails and she produced just enough cervical mucus to keep the sperm alive to meet that egg? We have a brand new human life. From the moment of conception, that new life has its very own DNA completely separate from the mother. Is it completely dependent on the mother? Yes, but I will tell you, a newborn is too. This is a brand new human life. So that's where we get to mode number 3, where it thins the uterine lining. The birth control pill or any hormonal contraceptive is not going to allow the uterine lining to thicken as it normally would throughout the cycle. Which means that if there is a brand new human life conceived within a woman's womb, that human life will travel through the fallopian tube, enter into the uterus, and have no place to implant. And that new life will die. That mother will never know that she's a mother. And that father will never know that he's a father. I want to take a moment and pause at this reality because I want to say that I am sorry if this is the first time you've heard this information. I had a couple that I was teaching, they were engaged, and they were going through marriage preparation. And she came up to me after our first class of natural family planning. And she said, I have an IUD, and I've already made an appointment to get it removed. It was after hearing this information, which she has never known before, and she had that IUD for multiple years. But she immediately got it removed. It is an injustice that men and women are not taught this about something that is so freely prescribed and given and made to feel like this is it. This is the answer. It's not. It is an injustice that this information is not freely given. Now, why are women put on the birth control pill anyways? Well, they are using it for birth control, right? Or they have irregular periods, or they have painful periods, or they have acne, or they want to relieve their PMS symptoms, or they have PCOS, endometriosis, ovarian cyst, whatever it is. There's a lot of reasons why women get on the pill. But unfortunately, as we're learning, the pill is just not good medicine. Now, here's the second part of the story, of my story, that I left out. After I had that interaction with that doctor that said, "Why do you want to ovulate?" I said, okay, this is not where I'm meant to be. So I went to Morningstar OBGYN. Again, I am 18 years old. I am not married. I am not intending on having a family anytime soon. But I went to this doctor and I said, I have irregular periods. How can you help? Immediately, she taught me how to chart my cycle. Based off of the data that my chart was giving her, she did timed blood work and she did an ultrasound. And based off of these tests, I was diagnosed with something called PCOS, which is also known as polycystic ovarian syndrome. That is a really long and technical term for basically just saying my ovaries don't work as well as they should. So I'm 18 when I get this diagnosis, and to be honest, it took a few years of figuring out different medications and diets and what have you to figure out how to make my body healthy again. But eventually I did. And the even better news about this too is that in the course of this time, as I'm seeking out health, real health, something that's actually going to help me ovulate like my body was meant to do, I met the man who would be my future husband, who's actually in the back right now and making me super nervous. I met my husband when I was 20 years old, and we got married at 21. I got married at 21. He's a little bit older. I won't tell you how old, but let's just say we didn't meet in college. Anyhow, that journey I took as a single woman, not married, not wanting to get pregnant, that health journey I took became the gift to my husband. Because when we got married, we decided that we wanted to have children right away. And had I stayed on the birth control pill, as many women do, had I not gone through that healing process, that hard work in helping me figure out how to get my body to ovulate again, had I not gone through that journey, I would not have the 3 unique, beautiful children that I have today that are here at this conference. And that is a bone-shaking reality. And it makes me realize how blessed I am that God has a plan that I just don't see. It was a gift to my future vocation in doing this now, in seeking the answers as a single woman, as a young adult single woman, rather than waiting, just saying, okay, well, maybe I'm not on the birth control pill and I'm just fine with these irregular periods, or I can handle the pain of my periods, and I'll worry about that when I want to get pregnant one day. No. You need to do this now. If you have any gut feeling or inkling in you that you just know something is off, either with your hormones or your cycle, or you're having to skip school for a day or two because of how painful your periods are, that is not normal and no one deserves that. And you need to trust your gut with what you are actually going to do to make your body healthy. The pill, unfortunately, is just a Band-Aid. I will tell you, it is very good at masking symptoms. It can absolutely help with period pain. It can absolutely help with acne. It can absolutely help with PMS. But the second you get off of that hormonal birth control, you will come right back to where you started. No woman is healthier getting off the pill than she was before she started it. And what's even worse is that as she's on the pill, the underlying cause of whatever unwanted symptom that she had is probably getting worse. Which means for a lot of women, when they do get off the pill, their symptoms come back with rage. And now they're at a point where they're finally seeking health and seeking a healthy menstrual cycle, a healthy reproductive system, when they could have done that years ago. So one of the purposes of this talk is to save you from those years of struggle. Because I will tell you right now that when I married my husband, had I not gone through the process, the hard work of healing my body, of healing my ovaries, of making sure I was ovulating regularly, hands down, we would have had a story of infertility. And that is a suffering I can't imagine. And I know a lot of people do imagine. I think I probably talked a lot about this already, so we can skip over that. So that's the bad news. But I want to leave you with the better news, that there is another option for you that maybe your doctor doesn't even know about, but that's okay, because now you are going to know about it. And it is something called Restorative Reproductive Medicine. What is that? It is a type of women's health science that investigates the root cause of whatever unwanted symptoms a woman is having. So there's no Band-Aid, there's no masking any symptoms. We're getting to the root. Why do you have the symptoms that you have? And let's heal that from the ground up. We're not going to mask it, we're going to heal it. Fertility charting, also known as natural family planning, fertility awareness-based methods, whatever you want to call it, is a really good and the usual starting point for this type of medicine. So typically, when you see a doctor that is trained in restorative reproductive medicine, that's going to be one of the first things they have you do, is they're going to tell you, okay, let's learn how to chart your cycle if you're not already. And by that fertility chart, they're going to be able to see how your hormones are behaving, because again, these signs that your body is giving you, like cervical mucus that I already talked about, is a direct reflection of your hormones. So a fertility chart is data. You're collecting data, really helpful data for the doctor that's going to be helping you. Now, I can't stand up here and not give credit to where credit is due. We have an amazing church. We have a church that's filled with wisdom and that does not succumb to peer pressure. In the height of the sexual revolution, there were a lot of Christian denominations that began changing their views about birth control, starting to say that it was okay, maybe in this circumstance or that. But that was really just a rolling cycle into a free-for-all. So there were a lot of people within the church even, that were pressing the church to change its view on birth control. And if you are unfamiliar with the church's stance, Catholic Church's stance on birth control, it's against it. The church is anti-contraception, which is a decision filled with wisdom. And so at the time, this was 1968, again, height of the sexual revolution. We had Pope Paul VI at the time, who was actually was canonized in 2018, and he is now Saint Paul VI. He wrote a document called Humanae Vitae, which is Latin for human life. And it is in this document that he outlines and affirms the church's lifelong stance on contraception, and says contraception is going to have very bad effects, not only on the women's body, but in any relationship. So he also writes, however, this is verbatim. Now, this quote is a little tricky. I put it up here so you had it, and I'm going to read it to you, but just know I'm going to explain it after I read it. In Humanae Vitae, he also says, scientists, also he's talking to medical professionals, researchers, anybody in this area. Scientists can considerably advance the welfare of marriage and the family, and also peace of conscience, if by pooling their efforts they strive to elucidate more thoroughly the conditions favorable to the proper regulations of birth. What does that mean? What that means is that not only in this document was he affirming the church's stance against contraception, affirming the church's stance for natural family planning, but he went a step further. And he said, doctors, I call you to start doing your research on the female cycle. Because at this time, again, 1968, couples really only had what was called the rhythm method. Raise your hand if you've heard of the rhythm method. Okay, just a few of you. Gen Z doesn't really know what that is, and that's okay. But it's the method of family planning that a lot of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers used. And it's really just the calendar method. It's looking at, okay, what was the last day of my period, which is gonna predict the next day of my period. But for anybody in here that has an unpredictable cycle, irregular periods, we know that that's not gonna work. So Pope Paul VI calls out doctors and says, do your research. Give couples something that works in every scenario. So because of the Catholic Church, we have science-based natural family planning, completely soaked in research. And we have this really beautiful thing called Restorative Reproductive Medicine. Our church is so wise, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it. So scientific research of the reproductive system, again, should not stop with family planning alone, like natural family planning. That is a beautiful gift. My husband and I have used it in our whole marriage. But if it stops at family planning, we are missing out on a whole other spectrum of what this chart can tell us, which is about your hormones and about your hormone balances, and if they're imbalanced. So fertility charting offers data for medical management of the reproductive system and hormones. So I'm gonna give you a little tiny crash course here into what is fertility charting. I like to call it fertility charting rather than natural family planning in this setting, just because I assume that most of you are probably not using it for family planning. So it really is just merely fertility charting. You're doing it in the same way where you're checking different signs your body is giving you throughout the cycle, and you're plotting that data onto a chart, and you're doing it for health management. So I like to call it fertility charting. So some of these signs that your body gives you to help you understand where you're at in your cycle, how your hormones are working, I'm gonna outline a few of them here for you today. So I already talked about cervical mucus, right? Some of you might be uncomfortable with that picture. I've seen it way often, so I'm like not even fazed. But of course, cervical mucus, cervical fluid is one of the main signs that your body is giving you throughout your cycle to help you understand when you're fertile and when you're not. Pretty much across the board with every single method of fertility charting, you're gonna be looking at your mucus in some way, shape, or form, which I promise you is gonna get a lot easier. And it's gonna be a lot more It's just gonna be a lot less icky. Now, the other thing you could do is to take your temperature, right? As I mentioned earlier, progesterone is a thermogenic hormone. It causes your body temperature to rise. So if you're taking your temperature every day, you can start to plot those temperatures on a chart and recognize when your temperature starts to rise. And that's a really good confirmation that you are past ovulation, you're not gonna ovulate again, and your period's probably gonna come in about 2 weeks. The next one here is hormone testing. Now, there are methods, some methods use this, some methods don't, but you basically pee on a stick and it tells you where your hormones are at, which can be very helpful in helping you understand where you're at in your cycle. And then lastly, here's cervix positioning. This is another biomarker or sign that your body can give you to help you recognize where you're at. Now, something with cervix positioning is that it is an internal exam of the cervix. So some women are comfortable with this and some women aren't, and that's perfectly fine. In most methods, this is an optional check anyways, but your cervix does change its position within your body depending on what hormone is dominant at the time. So this can also be a helpful one. So if I have not convinced you, women, yet already, why you should be charting your menstrual cycle, first of all, again, you're collecting data. That's all you're doing, collecting data. Because different charting patterns reflect different signs. And so as an instructor, I am trained to be able to look at a chart. I'm not a medical professional, but as a fertility charting instructor, I'm trained to be able to see any kind of red flags on a chart, things that might not look very normal. And at that point, I can say, okay, we have this data. This is really good that we have this data. I'm gonna send you to a really good doctor that's not gonna put you on the pill, and that's gonna give you real answers. It's a good starting point to dive deeper because I recognize I'm giving you a lot of information right now. I recognize that, and it's kind of a fire hose. So if you just want to dip your toes in the water, starting to even just pinpoint the time that you have your period can be really helpful, really helpful. Now, remembering too that charting your cycle does not necessarily equal natural family planning. Charting your cycle is what it says it is. It's looking at those signs in your body and plotting it on a chart. Natural family planning takes that information, and then the couple that's using it can prudently and in discernment decide if this is a cycle that they want to try to achieve or postpone pregnancy. And so they would time their intercourse in according to whatever intention they have, right? So it's basically taking that chart and then giving it a step forward. So just to give you some providers of this restorative reproductive medicine, there are 3 main providers, at least in the United States, that provide this type of women's health. The first one is going to be called NAPRO technology. It is short for natural procreative technology, and it's tied hand in hand with the Creighton model. So for those of you that knew what the Creighton model was, NAPRO technology is basically the research arm to that form of charting. So if you're going to a doctor that's trained in NAPRO technology, they're probably gonna have you start by learning how to chart your cycle with the Creighton method. And then based off of what your chart is saying, they will do X, Y, and Z to help heal you. Same with the second one, FEM, which is short for Fertility Education and Medical Management. They are a phenomenal organization. And I forgot to mention actually at the beginning of this talk, but I do have a podcast. It's called the Truth and Fertility Podcast. I love interviewing people on there about everything in this topic. And I actually just conducted an interview with 2 women that were representing FEM, and I just picked their brain about it. It is a very low barrier to entry method. They have an app, which is always awesome. It is actually one of the only apps I recommend if you want to use an app. And they are a really good starting point as well, where you learn to chart your cycle, and they have doctors that are trained in FEM to help you make sense of it. Now, lastly, neo-fertility. This one's actually kind of gaining steam in the United States right now. It originated in Australia, but it is, as I mentioned, it's becoming bigger here. And it's the same idea. You're charting your cycle, you see a doctor trained in neofertility who's going to help you make sense of it. And they also have a charting app as well called Chart Neo. That's probably the only other one that I would recommend. So Fem and Chart Neo are the two charting apps I would recommend in case any of you are interested in that. But these are going to be the three main restorative reproductive medicine providers that I personally would trust and recommend. Me, in my story, I went the naprotechnology route. I learned how to chart my cycle with the Creighton method. And the doctor that I saw, who is trained in naprotechnology, actually delivered my third baby. So I am just so grateful for doctors who take the time to learn this, because unfortunately, this information is not taught in mainstream medical school. And I've talked to enough doctors and students now that have never heard of this in their life. They've never heard of why charting your cycle could help you investigate your health. All they really get is a slide of natural family planning within the slides of all types of contraception, and it's kind of just downplayed. But there are doctors out there who know the truth about this, who are trained in these different providers of restorative reproductive medicine who can help you. So if you are sitting here going, man, I need to change my doctor, I highly recommend Googling either three of these. They all have their own websites, and you can look further into that. And they do also have a directory of doctors. Hopefully you could find one in your area, but if not, telehealth is becoming a huge thing, and I'm sure you could find one that is a provider in your state too. So the premise really is fertility charting is where you start. Then you receive a proper diagnosis, which is a requirement to then seek true healing, right? So if any of you here are highly interested now in learning how to chart your cycle, and maybe you want to go with the Creighton method, there are a plethora of methods. And actually, speaking of my podcast, I did just do an episode on where to start with fertility charting in 2026. I outline all of the mainstream methods, and really the best method is the one that you're going to use. I truly don't have quite any bias in that. It's the one you're going to use. But if you're interested in learning how to chart, that is what I offer, and it's completely virtual. So this QR code will take you to my website, which is just truthandfertility.com. And all you start out with is an intro session. It's an hour and a half where I go through all of the health and hormones and everything we went over today and more. And you leave that intro session knowing the basics of how to chart your cycle. And then from there, if you're interested, there's no commitment after that. If you're interested though, after that, we can then work one-on-one together to dive deeper into charting your cycle in a personal way that is unique to your own cycle. And I can help you if you do have an inkling of something being off, right? I never, ever want to gatekeep information though. I want you to know about all the methods, and I want you to choose the one that you will use. So with this QR code, I have a resource for you guys where it's a list of all of the places that I trust and I recommend. So there's a doctor's list, a directory, or links, I should say, to directories of doctors that I trust that are trained in restorative reproductive medicine. I also list some podcasts and books on there that I highly recommend if you want to learn more about this. And I also have the information for those three providers of restorative reproductive medicine in case you're interested in that too. Now, I think I mentioned it, but there are QR codes in the back for this exact presentation. So as you're leaving today, if you want this PowerPoint, you can get it on your phone. If you ever want to go back to it or get these QR codes again, you're welcome to scan it on your way out. And I want to end with this. If you leave the SEEK conference with anything, I want you to know how much the Lord desires to heal you. And we are body and soul. And the reason I am so incredibly passionate about this topic and just had you guys sit in on an hour of a science class is because this is truth. This is objective truth that I am so convinced that God wants you to know. Because he wants you to be whole. He wants you to be healed. His healing, the Lord's healing, is not a mask. It's not a Band-Aid. But it is a healing rooted in the truth of who he is, which is the divine healer. He created the female body so intricately in the way that he did, and all he wants is to see it working like that. He wants healing for you. So I hope you leave this talk today with encouragement, knowing that there's another option out there, and I hope you at least learned something about your body today. So thank you.